first transcontinental railroad. So what this did is it connected the United States from the Midwest over here in Omaha all the way to Sacramento. And it was from the two different railways. It was the Union Pacific Railway and the Central Pacific Railway. So why would we feel a need? Why would people want to move west? Let me just ask you guys that. Why would people want to move west? What's one reason? Just think about it. We have a little country. What would happen if we moved west? Exactly. Expand the country. What's another reason why people might want to move west? What would we want? Like, why? What could have possibly been out here that we would want? Like, there's like oil in the Middle East. But what is out here? Exactly. There's things like gold. A couple other reasons along this way. Farming is another reason. Go back. There we go. Farming. Another one, claimed territory, boast population. A lot of this was area of the country that Native Americans lived in at that time. So really, and also like a need for steel. Like the reason why they want to build a railroad, there would be, as we're growing, there'd be a need for and demand for steel. Basically, everywhere that we're trying to expand our territory. So what did they call people that were seeking gold in this area? And I'll give you a hint. There's an NFL team in San Francisco that named them after that. Do you guys know that? Do you guys know the NFL team in San Francisco? They're called the 49ers. So that's why they're called the 49ers. Because people in that time period wanted to come out here and discover gold. So, moving along, this is when the railways met. So this is when the Union and the Pacific Railways met. This is literally the middle. You can see all the workers all around. A lot of the people that worked on the Transcontinental Railroad from the east, a lot were Irish descent, and on the West Coast, actually, a lot were Chinese immigrants that worked on the Transcontinental Railroad and other railroads in the western part of the country. So this just shows that meeting in Utah, which was the center, and the governor, Stanford, who was the governor of Utah, drove the golden spike to symbolize the completion of the railroad. So, moving on to the next part here. So, the Transcontinental Railroad, like I said, it created a demand for steel, both for the railways and for the people that were settling in the West. Regional businesses could now ship across the nation. So, before this, they had a lot more difficulty getting any goods across the country, obviously. There was not, like today, we have airplanes, we have the highway system, we have all these methods of transportation to get goods across the country. Back then, you didn't have that. It could be a perilous journey to get from one side of the country to the other, and it could take a very, very long time. This cut down the both transportation costs and risks, so now settlers could get the goods that they needed much quicker, and they could get more of it. So this also improved communication and the transport of people and freight. So one thing about the Transcontinental Railroad is that the railroad owners, along the sides of the tracks, they allowed communications companies to put telegraph markers up you guys know why they would do that? What is a telegraph? Do you guys know what a telegraph is? Basically, it's an old way of communicating even before the phone. Like you wouldn't be able to necessarily talk. You couldn't talk on it, but you could send messages through the basically it's set up almost like telephone wires. Like it looks like telephone wires. Like you see those everywhere. But all along the railroads, the railroad companies said basically we'll let you do this for free if you want to put up all of this communication up or these just like basically telephone poles up and down the railway. So before this, like it cost $1,000 to travel across the U.S. and I mean I don't even know what that would be in today's money, but I mean we're probably talking like $50,000, something like that, something like completely ridiculous of what we would think now. And afterwards, it was $150, which would still be a lot of money in those days, but certainly not the fortune that it was before. Oh, is that it?
The Homestead Act is listed.
Oh, this is what I was talking about earlier. I'm sorry. So yeah, they allowed the telegraph companies to be strung along the tracks. Yeah, I mean here it is right here. This looks familiar though, right? I mean we see this even now. It's just telephone lines instead of telegraph. So yeah, they transported workers and equipment for free. Go to the Homestead Act, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, go to the Homestead Act.
Because if these look familiar, these are the ones last week's assignment when you filled in these notes, but we want to highlight a couple things here.
Okay. So another major component of westward expansion was what was called the Homestead Act. Now, the Homestead Act was passed in 1862. This initially just included like white settlers, but it eventually, as the years would go on, would include women. It would include African Americans after the 14th Amendment, and it would include even immigrants after 1898, which was something, as the progress of society was happening, it was a big change from when it first came into, when it was first passed in 1862. Do you guys know what was going on in 1862, just in general in the United States? It was a huge war going on in the United States. What's a huge war in the 1800s? Huge. Civil War. The Civil War was going on. So, in the Homestead Act, all these settlers would have to do would be to pay a registration fee, and they would get 160 acres of land, and they had to pledge to own it after 5 years. So, like we said before, the government was so eager to move people west because, as we said, to make the country bigger and natural resources, and they wanted to just expand the country. They wanted it makes you more powerful. You're able to have more people. You can collect more taxes. Everything that goes into it can make you a stronger nation. So the only requirements really were that you had to be 20 years old or the head of a household, and you would have never bore arms against the United States. But like I said, we're in 1862. We're in the Civil War. So after the Civil War ended and the Confederacy lost, old Confederate soldiers under that second clause never bore arms, never fought the United States, would be not allowed to participate in the same Homestead Act as others. So, what about Native Americans? So at this time, Native Americans, through government intervention in 1851 with Indian removal were already removed from a lot of their ancestral settlements and moved to areas such as, Oklahoma was basically like the big Indian territory that was in the Midwest. However, now you have all of these white settlers they're getting all these little plots of land. How do you guys think that would make Native Americans feel? They are already taken out. They're getting moved west. Like, how would that make you feel? Sure. So Native Americans, say there used to be major Native American settlements all down the East Coast. In 1851, they got removed to places like Oklahoma. However, with the introduction of the Homestead Act, now white settlers are moving ever and ever closer out west, and they're getting into conflicts with each other. Like, how would that make you feel if you're a Native American? You already have these treaties. Excellent answer. You'd want to fight back. And really, what the government's solution was they wanted to assimilate them into American society as landowners and citizens. They wanted Native Americans to stop worshiping their gods. They wanted them to act more like the white settlers that were coming over. Again, how would that make you feel? That would make you, like you said, want to fight back. And honestly, that's exactly what happened in the Indian Wars in later years. But that's another subject. So, after the Homestead Act and after the issues surrounding the Native Americans, in 1887, Grover Cleveland signed the Dawes Act. This divided the reservation land that we saw in Oklahoma. So the Native Americans, they get kicked out of their ancestral lands, the United States makes them settle into Oklahoma. And even after they're in these reservations, as we call them, the Dawes Act, which was passed by the United States, divided even that reservation lands that we made a move to. They divided that reservation land into allotments for farming and ranching. So, as Americans moved westward, they continued to come into conflict with the white settlers. And the white settlers, they believed that assimilation was the only way. And in the Dawes Act, they said that that the United States would grant citizenship for anyone that stayed for 25 years. So let me ask you this. If you're a Native American and you've been on this land for generations, would this mean anything to you? Would you even want to be part of the United States after how they've treated you? It's almost like laughable. Anyone that stayed for 25 years, it's almost laughable. So the Dawes Act allowed the U.S. to confiscate and redistribute this land. However, the Native Americans did have a chance to have some of this land, but if they did not get their own individual plots, it would be resold to white settlers. So really, the United States government took the land that was initially given to Native Americans and then repurposed the land and sold it off. And you can imagine this created a lot of conflicts with Native Americans. So, for a quick review, imagine that you're a Plains Indian that received an allotment of land under the Dawes Act. So, the government gave you an allotment of land that is already on the land that you basically live on. So they're saying, you are allowed to live on this land that you've already been living on. How would your thoughts and feelings change? How would you feel about that? It's pretty despicable, right? This all stemmed into the Indian Wars.
What is really important is that, because what we're going to do next is